Colorado Territory, 1872. The snow had not yet melted off the Sangre de Cristo Mountains when Kenzie Alden ran for her life, blood drying on her cheek and her heart pounding like a gunshot in her chest. She did not look back, not when her boot slipped on a patch of mud, not when the saddlebag scraped her torn dress raw. She had left her husband lying face down on the parlor floor, and she did not care whether he got up again. She only cared that he could not follow. The mare she had stolen from the livery limped by the time dusk fell over the pines. Kenzie slid from the saddle, legs shaking, and led the animal down a narrow trail bordering a sharp ridge. Somewhere below, a creek whispered. She paused, chest heaving, and scanned the horizon. Then she saw it tucked between trees and half swallowed by brush, a shack. Small, weathered, with smoke rising faintly from the chimney. Kenzie reached for the pistol at her waist, the same one she had taken from the drawer beneath the kitchen sink. Her hand was trembling. She crossed the remaining distance with slow steps, her eyes fixed on the door. It opened before she reached it. He stood there like part of the land himself, broad-shouldered, tall, his hat shadowing a face that looked carved out of firewood and sun. His shirt sleeves were rolled to his elbows, arms dusted with sawdust. He had a saw in one hand and in the other a comb she did not expect. "You lost?" he asked. Kenzie stared at him, unsure what part of her was still capable of speech. "I need help," she said. He looked her over. Not the way her husband used to a leer, a threat, but with quiet understanding. His eyes flicked to the bruise darkening her jaw. "You hurt?" he asked. "Not bad." He stepped aside. "Come in." She hesitated. "You do not know who I do not need to." She walked inside. The shack smelled of pine and smoke. A cot sat in one corner, a pot of beans simmered on a cast iron stove, and a rifle leaned near the window. It was not much, but it was safe. She could feel it like a breath she had not taken in years. He shut the door behind her. "I am Zeke Warren. Kenzie Alden." He nodded once. "Sit, Kenzie." She sat on a stool near the stove. Her hands were shaking again, so she curled them tight in her lap. "You can stay here as long as you need," Zeke said, setting the saw aside. She blinked. "Just like that. Just like that. Why?" He poured her a tin cup of water and handed it to her gently. "Because you showed up scared and alone. Because I have seen what men like that do to women. And because this place is quiet enough not to ask why." Kenzie felt something break loose inside her, relief, maybe, or the beginning of trust. She drank the water. Zeke did not ask questions that night. He gave her the cot and took the floor. When she woke in the dark, gasping from a dream she could not remember, he sat up fast but said nothing. Just watched her until her breathing slowed again. By morning, her horse had gone lame. Zeke saw to it without complaint. He moved slow, careful, like everything he did was meant not to upset her. Kenzie helped him chop wood that afternoon, even though her hands were raw from riding. She needed to move to feel useful. He gave her gloves and worked beside her in silence. "You live out here alone?" she asked. Zeke nodded. "Been 6 years now." "Why?" He split a log, then paused. Looked out toward the trees. "Lost someone. A long time back." Kenzie did not ask more. She knew the shape of grief when she heard it. That evening he made rabbit stew and handed her a full bowl. "Thank you," she said. "You do not owe me thanks." But she did. She owed him more than she could say. The next days passed like a slow breath. She slept more. Ate better. Her bruises healed. Every time a branch snapped outside, her body still tensed, but Zeke was always there nearby, steady, watching without pressing. He built her a small shelf for her things. That same day, she found a tin of salve left quietly on her cot. When she asked about it, he only shrugged. Figured it might help. She did not say much, but something inside her started to thaw. One morning, the sun barely risen, Kenzie found him sitting on the porch steps, cleaning his rifle. She joined him, arms wrapped around her knees. "His name was Thomas," she said. "My husband." Zeke looked over, but did not interrupt. "I married too young. My father owed him money and Thomas. He was angry at the world. Took it out on me." Zeke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I tried to leave once before. He found me. Broke my ribs that time. This time I waited until he drank himself half blind. Took what I could and left. You did right. Kenzie looked at him. You are not afraid he will come for me? I am not afraid of men like him. She believed that. Maybe for the first time she believed someone could protect her and not expect anything in return. Her voice dropped. I do not know what to do now. Zeke set the rifle aside. You do not have to know yet. Just breathe. You are safe here. She looked at the sunrise spilling gold across the treetops. I have not felt safe in years. Zeke's eyes met hers. You are safe now. That night, it snowed lightly. Kenzie stood in the doorway watching flakes drift down like ash. Zeke came up behind her, keeping a respectful distance. You miss town? He asked. No. I never liked it there. Too many eyes. Too many rules. I like the quiet. He nodded. Me too. She turned her head. You saved me, Zeke. I just opened the door. She shook her head. No. You gave me more than that. He looked at her a long time, then finally spoke. You are not alone anymore, Kenzie. And for the first time, she believed it. She stood there beside him until the snow stopped falling. The wind shifted in early April, carrying the scent of thawing earth and pine sap. The creek below ran faster now, fed by snowmelt from the peaks beyond, and the days stretched longer, full of the kind of silence that held no threat. Kenzie woke with her hair damp from sweat and her palm pressed flat against her chest. She lay still, listening to the world outside, the rustle of branches, the faint call of a hawk, the soft creak of Zeke moving about the yard. No yelling, no doors slamming, no boots pacing the floor, just the steady rhythm of a man who did not raise his voice to be heard. She pulled her shawl tight, stepped outside, and found him near the edge of the clearing, dragging a felled spruce across a patch of flattened grass. His coat hung from a branch, sleeves turned inside out. He worked with measured effort, breath fogging in the cool air, and didn't look up until she crossed toward him. You always start this early? She asked. Zeke leaned on the rope looped around his shoulder. Only when the ground's soft enough to cut a path. I'm clearing for a second shed. She brushed hair from her eyes. You build it all yourself? Nothing out here gets done unless I do it. She crouched beside the stump and ran her fingers over the rings etched into the wood. How many winters you think this tree saw? More than I have. You want to help? She pressed her fingers into her palm. Show me how. He handed her the draw knife and walked her through the motion of stripping bark. It was slow, physical work. Her hands blistered before noon, but she didn't stop. Zeke didn't hover or correct her unless asked. He gave her space to learn, and that was a kind of kindness she hadn't known existed. Around midday, they paused beneath the shade of a juniper tree, sharing bread and dried apples. She chewed in silence, watching a woodpecker hammer at a trunk nearby. Why this spot? She asked. For the shed. For your life. His jaw flexed as he leaned back on his elbows. It was far enough from everything I didn't want, and close enough to what you did. His eyes lifted to meet hers. That part one hadn't figured out until now. Kenzie looked down at her lap, unsure what to do with the warmth that crawled up her neck. She changed the subject. You ever go back to town? Only when I need salt or bullets. Sometimes nails. You talk to anyone? I used to. Not lately. Why not? Talking's never done me much good. Out here, a man doesn't have to explain himself. She nodded slowly. I spent years explaining myself. And none of it mattered. You don't have to explain anything here. She didn't speak again for a long time. But when he stood to finish the work, she followed. That evening, after the fire had burned low and the last light of day sank behind the trees, Zeke fixed a loose board in the roof while she washed tin dishes with creek water warmed on the stove. The shack smelled of cedar and ash. He came down the ladder, rolling his shoulders. You hungry again? She shook her head. No, just tired. You sleep all right last night? I did. Not at first. But I got there. He nodded once, then paused. Kenzie, if you ever want to send a letter to someone, I make trips to Fort Garland every so often. She looked up. I don't have anyone to write. There a place you'd go if you could? I don't know. I never thought beyond getting away. Zeke moved to the bench, sat with his boots planted firm on the floor. Then maybe stay until you do. She studied him in the fire's glow, his hands scarred from work, the deep lines at the corner of his eyes, the way he never looked at her like she was fragile, just like she was whole and hadn't remembered it yet. You're not afraid of what might follow me, she asked. Zeke shook his head. If something comes, I'll be ready. You don't ask for anything. Not even thanks. I don't want anything from you you're not willing to give. She crossed the room, slow and careful, and sat beside him on the bench. The silence held between them, not cold or empty, but full of something unspoken and steady. I don't know what this is yet, she said, voice low. You don't have to. Just stay. She leaned back against the wall, eyes closing as the warmth from the fire settled deep into her bones. Outside, the wind passed through the trees like a sigh, and inside the shack, neither of them spoke again that night. But when Zeke stood to bank the fire and turned back to look at her, the corner of his mouth curved soft and certain, like he'd already decided he wasn't letting her go. The trail east of the cabin turned muddy with the spring thaw, and the dirt clung to Kenzie's boots as she wandered past the line of blackened tree stumps Zeke had cleared. She carried a basket over her arm and moved carefully, searching along the edges of the brush where the sun had coaxed early shoots out of the ground. The land was waking, and she wanted to greet it properly. Zeke had shown her which plants could be boiled down into tinctures and which should be left alone. She carried his notes folded in oilskin in her skirt pocket, careful not to crush the delicate stems she gathered. Wild mint, rabbit tobacco, and yarrow. Her hands worked with a purpose now, and her feet knew the path back without needing eyes on it. When she returned, she found Zeke at the fence line, hammering a crossbeam into place. A pair of loose boards lay near his feet, and his shirt clung damp to his back. He glanced up when she approached but didn't pause in his rhythm. You figure we'll get a few more goats? She asked, setting the basket on the porch rail. That's the thought, he said, driving the last nail in. A milk dough, maybe two. If I can trade for them. Kenzie brushed her palms on her apron. I could try drying herbs. Sell them when you ride in next. Zeke straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. You'd want to do that? I'd want to do something that's mine. He nodded as if that settled it. She liked that about him, how he didn't lace his approval with praise or pride. Just listened and allowed her the space to choose. That night, she spread her gathered herbs across a length of muslin and strung them above the stove to dry. Zeke carved a spoon from a block of aspen beside the hearth, his knife moving in smooth, practiced strokes. The firelight caught on his forearms, the muscles moving beneath skin like the steady pull of river current. You always work with your hands? She asked, watching the shape emerge from the wood. Most of my life, he said. Started with fences, then saddles. After that, it was whatever needed mending. Did you ever think of doing something else? He shrugged. Didn't have the time to dream much. I was busy keeping things from falling apart. Kenzie tucked a sprig of mint into a tin. You don't talk much about before. I figure what matters is what's in front of me. She rested her hands on the table, eyes on his. And what's in front of you now? He set the spoon down and leaned back, not answering right away. The fire popped softly. Then he said, a woman who's stronger than she knows. A life that feels like more than just a holding pattern. Kenzie's throat tightened. She looked down, then back up. You're not waiting on me to prove anything, are you? She asked. No, he said. You've already done the hard part. You stayed. The wind stirred through the chimney flue. She rose, crossed to the bench beside him, and sat close enough to feel the heat from his arm. I thought I'd always be running, she said. That I'd never feel steady again. He turned toward her, his voice low. You're not running now. She reached for his hand, slow and certain, and laced her fingers with his. Outside, the sky deepened to indigo and a bird owl called from somewhere in the trees. Inside, the silence stretched warm and full between them. Not empty, not waiting, just shared. Zeke's thumb brushed over the back of her hand, and neither of them pulled away. The first rain came in the night, soft and steady, tapping against the roof like a lullaby. When morning broke, the world outside the cabin was washed clean, the air rich with the scent of wet soil and pine needles. Kenzie stepped outside barefoot, her hem dampening as she moved through the grass that had turned lush over the past few days. Zeke was near the creek, stooped over a half-built sluice box. He'd been salvaging planks from an old trapper's shack upriver, muttering something about runoff and erosion. She watched him work a while, his focus narrowed to the angle of the boards and the flow of water. He hadn't noticed her yet. "Do you ever miss being around folks?" she asked, her voice carrying over the murmur of the current. He looked up, shielded his eyes. "Sometimes, not often." She stepped down toward the bank, careful where the mud slicked under her feet. "I was thinking, I might go into Fort Garland next time you do." Zeke set the hammer aside. "You feel ready for that?" "I don't think ready's the word, but I'd like to choose where I stand next, even if it's just a general store porch." He nodded once. "We'll go together." "Not afraid someone might recognize me?" "I'm not afraid of what's behind you." She crouched beside the sluice box, trailing her fingers through the water. "I never learned how to read proper maps. Thomas didn't see the use in it." Zeke picked up a nail, tapped it gently into the wood. "I could teach you." Kenzie smiled without looking at him. "You do that. You'd learn quick. You watch the land like you've lived in it your whole life." They worked in tandem after that, her holding planks steady while he drove nails. When the rain started again in the late afternoon, they jogged back to the cabin together, laughing when her skirts tangled and she nearly lost a boot in the muck. Inside, she peeled off her wet shawl and hung it across the back of a chair. Zeke stirred the fire, adding a split log and coaxing the flames higher. "Do you have family?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bench to warm her feet. He didn't answer right away. "Then a brother. Older. Name's Elias." "Where's he?" "Carpenter in Nebraska. We wrote letters for a while after I left. Fell out of touch after the war." "You ever think about writing again?" Zeke rested his arms on his knees, gaze on the fire. "Sometimes, but I never knew what I'd say." She watched him, quiet a moment. "I think he'd want to hear you're alive." He looked at her then, something unreadable behind his eyes. "You think about reaching out to anyone?" Her hands stilled on her lap. "I had a younger sister. She married into a family in Denver. I don't know if she'd want to hear from me." "I left without saying a word." Zeke's voice was gentle. "You were surviving. That's not the same as abandoning." Kenzie leaned her head against the wall, watching the fire flicker across the beams overhead. "Maybe when I can write without my hands shaking, I'll send her something." "You will." That evening, she made a stitch bag from a scrap of canvas and filled it with dried mint and moss to hang near the bed. The scent helped her sleep deeper, and when she stirred in the dark, she didn't wake with a start. Instead, she heard Zeke breathing evenly across the room, and it calmed her. By the end of the week, the first shoots of wild onion poked through the brush near the path leading west. Kenzie gathered a handful and brought them in, her apron streaked green from kneeling in the grass. Zeke was carving again, this time shaping a handle for a kettle hook. She watched his hands move, slow and sure. "Has this place changed since I came?" she asked, voice quiet. He didn't stop working. "It's more alive now." Kenzie knelt beside him, her knees brushing the smooth floorboards. "I thought I'd never feel whole again." "You are," he said. "You just didn't know what that felt like yet." Her breath caught, and she reached for the carving knife, her fingers brushing his. "Show me how you do it." He placed the wood in her hand, guiding her grip without taking over. "Let the blade meet the grain. Don't force it." She followed his lead, the knife slipping smooth through the wood. His hand stayed near hers, not pressing, just steady. Outside, the rain had stopped. A thin band of gold stretched low across the trees, and the cabin filled with its soft light. Kenzie looked up at him, the wood warm beneath her palm. "I'm not afraid anymore." Zeke met her gaze. "Then we've already won." And in that quiet, with the smell of cedar and fresh earth between them, she leaned forward and kissed him. Not rushed, not uncertain, just sure and right and steady like the land itself. The snowmelt gave way to budding cottonwoods and the low hum of insects returning to the world. Kenzie stood at the edge of the garden plot, a hoe in her hands and dirt under her fingernails. Rows of turned earth stretched behind her, uneven but honest. She pressed her boot into the soil to test the firmness, then reached for the seed bag tucked beneath the fence post. From the porch, Zeke watched her with an expression she hadn't seen before, not pride or wonder, more like quiet awe, like he was still getting used to what it meant to share his days with someone else. She didn't look up when she said, "The roots will take better if I plant before the next moon." "I trust you," he answered. She smiled faintly, shaking flax seeds into her palm. "You don't even know if I've got a farmer's sense." "You're growing something," he said. "That's more than most." Kenzie pressed the seeds into the soil, one at a time. "There was a woman back in my childhood who used to let me help in her garden. She kept a ledger of planting dates and harvests going back 15 years. I used to think that was a kind of magic." Zeke leaned against the porch beam. "You ever think about keeping one?" "I think I'd like to." By week's end, the fence was reinforced, the garden rows marked with flat stones they'd gathered from the creek, and a small pen had been added near the rear slope of the property. Zeke traded a set of copper hinges and a woven bridle for 2 goats and a weathered cart, and returned from Fort Garland with a parcel wrapped in brown paper. He handed it to Kenzie without ceremony. Figured it was time. Inside was a ledger bound in blue cloth, its pages blank and waiting. Her fingers lingered on the spine. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." She looked up at him, something warm and steady blooming behind her ribs. "That's the second time you've handed me something I didn't think I deserved. You deserve more than you know." That night, she wrote the date at the top of the first page, then listed the seeds planted and the weather that day. When she closed it, she placed it on the shelf beside the dried herbs and the spoon she'd carved under his guidance. Later, she found him kneeling beside the hearth, sharpening the blade of a drawknife with a whetstone. She sat beside him, leaning her shoulder against his. "I've been thinking," she said, voice low. He didn't look up. "About what?" "About staying. You already are. I mean for good." Zeke set the stone aside. "You sure?" "I never was before. But now I am." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers closing around hers. "Then we'll build more than a garden here." The following weeks passed not in great events, but in the slow weaving together of 2 lives. Kenzie stitched curtains from old flour sacks, and Zeke added a second window to the cabin wall with salvaged glass. They read from a Bible she found in the bottom of his trunk, not for the sermons, but for the names and dates scribbled in the margins by his mother's hand. Kenzie wrote her sister a letter, folded it neatly, and sent it with Zeke on his next trip to town. She didn't expect an answer but felt lighter for having sent it. One afternoon, as the sun angled high above the pines, Zeke caught her wrist as she passed him in the yard. "Come with me." She followed him down the slope, past the creek, to a grove where wild plums bloomed pale pink among the branches. He knelt and brushed away the leaf litter, revealing a flat patch of earth. "I've been clearing this for something," he said. She knelt beside him. "What?" "A place for us. A proper home. Not just a cabin someone fled to. Something we build together." Her heart beat slow and deep in her chest. "You mean to stay here? With me?" "I mean to grow old here. With you." She reached for his face and touched his jaw, rough with a day's growth. "Then let's build it." They married under a cottonwood while the creek ran full and clear. Zeke carved their initials into the bark and Kenzie pressed her palm to the mark, sealing it like a vow. They laid the foundation stone by stone, side by side. Each board nailed, each wall raised, was done without hurry. Zeke shaped the beams with care, and Kenzie stained them with a mix of boiled walnuts and linseed oil. The roof was cedar, the floors packed earth until they could afford more. But it was theirs. By the time autumn returned, they had a home with 2 rooms, a porch that faced west, and shelves full of her dried herbs and his small carvings. Her journal, now thick with entries, sat beside a new one, its cover still unmarked. Her sister replied that winter. A short letter, cautious but kind, with news of a child born and a husband gone to work on the rail cruise. The words weren't heavy with forgiveness, but they held a door open. Kenzie read it aloud by the firelight, Zeke's arm around her waist, their dog curled at her feet. She folded it carefully and placed it in the ledger between the pages of that first planting. "There's a kind of peace in knowing the past can't chase me here," she said. Zeke pressed his lips to her temple. "It never could. Not where you've grown roots." She turned to look at him fully, eyes steady. "I love you." "I know," he said, soft and sure. "I love you, too." And there, at the end of so much loss and beginning, they stayed. Years passed. The trees grew taller. The garden widened. Her name became known in the valley for healing teas and tinctures, his for the cabins he helped raise from timber and sweat. Neighbors came and went, but the two of them remained, bound not by rescue, but by the life they tended together. On warm evenings, they sat on the porch, his hand in hers, watching the light fade over the ridge. They didn't speak much, didn't need to. The silence between them was full of trust and years and the kind of love that doesn't burn fast, but steady. And when the wind shifted through the aspens, carrying the scent of distant rain, they breathed it in together, knowing they were home.